My name is Leah Price, and if anyone asked me what my married years have been like, the honest answer would be this. I've survived them with a smile so carefully practiced it became second nature. I knew when to stay quiet, when to nod, when to laugh off a cruel remark so dinner wouldn't fall apart. In Haley Perry's house, my mother-in-law's house, that skill had become almost instinctive. That house was always full of people, full of the clink of silverware against plates, full of questions that sounded warm on the surface, and full of looks held just long enough to remind me I had never truly belonged there. That night, nearly everyone was there. Haley was bustling around, setting the last dish on the table. Henry Ward sat at the head, as usual, silent, his face already heavy before anyone had even said a word. James Taylor leaned back in his chair, occasionally pulling one corner of his mouth into a faint, detached smile, like a man who had come only because he was expected to. Emily Morris and Eva Bennett sat near each other, talking softly under their breath, while Wyatt Collins stood by the kitchen counter, pouring more wine for Julian Powell, my husband. From the outside, it looked like an ordinary family dinner, the kind people take pictures of and post online with a polite caption underneath. I tried to believe that too. I told myself I only had to get through the evening, only had to make sure Lily didn't have to witness another argument. She was upstairs, playing in Emily's old room. I had felt relieved knowing she wasn't sitting at this table, didn't have to hear the kind of tone that could teach a child to believe affection always comes with humiliation. Julian started the way he always did, with the kind of joke that only the person inside it knows is not a joke at all. He looked at the potatoes I had brought and gave a thin smile, saying I still had a gift for turning something simple into something terrible. A few people stiffened, and then Haley hurried to smooth it over, saying, "Come on now, tonight is a family gathering." Julian didn't stop. He said I spent money without thinking, that if the household were left to me, nothing in it would stay where it belonged. He brought up the way I was raising our daughter, said I was spoiling Lily, that I was weak, and because I was weak, I was raising her to be soft, too. I sat there, with my back straight, my hands tucked under the table until they had gone numb. I understood that every sentence had been chosen carefully. Julian never shouted at first. He preferred to cut people with a calm voice, because that made him look rational, and if I reacted, I would look like the overly sensitive one. The pain was no longer in the words themselves. The pain was in the fact that everyone could hear them clearly. Henry looked down at his plate. James took a sip of wine. Wyatt turned toward the window as if there were something outside more worth noticing. Emily and Eva exchanged a look. There was something uneasy in it, but neither of them spoke. I said very quietly that Julian needed to stop. I thought I had stayed calm enough, but that calmness seemed to irritate him more. He laughed, then dragged private things from our marriage right onto the dinner table. He said I was best at playing the victim, that at home I couldn't manage anything, so now I needed to act respectable in front of everyone. Every word was deliberate. Every word aimed at the most private parts of me, the parts a husband was supposed to protect, not expose, just so he could trample them. For the first time in years, I didn't swallow it. I lifted my eyes and looked straight at him. My voice shook, but it was clear enough when I said, "You like turning me into a joke in front of your whole family because this is the only place you ever feel powerful." The entire table went still. I saw something change in Julian's eyes, fast and dark. It was the moment his warped pride had been hit exactly where it lived. He shoved back his chair and stood up so suddenly that it scraped hard across the floor. I still hadn't fully processed what was happening when his hand came down across my face. The sound sliced through everything. My cheek burned instantly, my head snapped to one side, and my ears rang as if water had rushed into them. But the most terrible feeling was not the pain on my skin. The most terrible thing was the silence that followed. No one rushed toward me, no one shouted, no one said a single word that this was wrong. I touched my cheek, slowly enough that even I felt strange to myself. Haley was frozen, her lips moving without sound. Henry still sat there as if nailed to his chair. James had stopped smiling, but he didn't move. Eva's hand tightened on the table. Emily had gone white, and Julian, he was breathing hard, his eyes still fixed on me, as if the fault belonged to the person who had just been hit. In that moment, a cold truth ran down my spine. This slap was not the beginning. It was something that had been fed for years by every time people looked away, by every don't make a scene, by every dinner that simply continued after I had been humiliated. Their silence was not harmless. It was the place Julian had grown up in, the place where he had learned he could hurt someone and still keep his seat at this table. I felt ashamed, I felt pain, but above all, I felt a kind of clarity so sharp it hurt. If I stayed standing there, if I put that smile back on to keep the peace one more time, my daughter would grow up learning that a woman could be humiliated in front of an entire family, while everyone else called it a private matter. I had just started to step back, when small footsteps came from the staircase, quick but steady. The whole room turned. Lily stood on the last step, her eyes wide, staring straight at Julian, and when she spoke, I saw the color drain from his face. Before I could even lift a hand to my burning cheek, the room had already fallen into a strange silence. It wasn't the silence of shame or sympathy. It felt more like a pause, where everyone was waiting to see this pass in the usual way. I would swallow it, Julian would smooth out his tone, Haley would change the subject, and dinner would go on as if nothing had happened. But the one who broke that silence was my daughter. She didn't run to me like a frightened child and throw her arms around me. She stayed exactly where she was, back straight, both hands lightly clenched at her sides, staring directly at Julian in a way that sent a chill through me. I had never seen that look on my daughter's face before. It wasn't defiance, and it wasn't fear. It was the calm of a child who had been watching for far too long. Julian turned to her, his voice still sharp with anger he hadn't brought under control. "Go upstairs, now." She didn't move. Then she spoke, slowly, clearly, as if she had been repeating the sentence in her head for a very long time. "I know who Dad called last night, and I know he said Mom is a burden." For a second, I thought I had heard her wrong. And I wasn't the only one. The whole table seemed to go taut. Julian's face changed color right in front of me. The aggression that had been there a moment earlier drained so quickly that it left behind something cold and empty. His eyes flickered once, barely, then fixed on her face, as if he could force her to take the words back. I looked at my daughter, my heart hammering in my chest. What shocked me wasn't just that she had stepped in to shield me. What hurt was that she knew. She knew more than I had ever realized. Which meant there had been so many times she had heard things, seen things, gathered up the scraps adults assume children won't understand, and quietly kept all of them inside. Haley spoke first, too fast, too urgently. "What does a child know, Leah?" She probably overheard something and filled in the rest. But her voice was shaking. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at Julian. My daughter was still standing there, her eyes never leaving her father. I didn't imagine it. I heard Dad say Mom wears him out, and that all he needed was more time before everything would be settled. A small sound came from Emily Morris's side of the table. She set her water glass down hard, not enough to spill it, but hard enough to make everyone look over. Emily stared at Julian as if she had just heard a missing piece click into place. Eva Bennett, sitting beside her, went rigid too, her lips pressing into a thin line. Their eyes met for only a second, the kind of look shared by people remembering old moments they had spent years trying to dismiss. I glanced at James Taylor. He lowered his head and stared at his plate as if the white porcelain had suddenly become more important than anything else in the room. Wyatt Collins was different. He looked up, his face frozen, both shoulders stiff. For the first time that night, I saw someone in this family understand that what had just happened was not a momentary loss of temper. I pulled my daughter toward me. Her hand was ice cold. I wanted to hold her against me, wanted to tell her not to say another word, but at the same time, a question sharp as a blade cut through my mind. What else had she been forced to witness in silence? Julian took half a step forward, trying to reclaim the voice of someone still in control. "Go upstairs, right now. The adults are talking." The way he stressed the words made me realize he was afraid. Julian only turned controlling when something had slipped out of his grasp. My daughter lifted her chin. "If I go upstairs, Dad will just say Mom is making it all up again." I heard Emily draw in a breath. Eva turned fully toward me. Haley went pale. "That's enough. This has gone too far." My daughter gave the slightest shake of her head. Her voice was quiet but steady. "Not yet, Grandma. I also know Dad deleted messages in the kitchen before everyone got here." Every word landed like a stone thrown into water. Everyone had been trying to keep still. I didn't feel humiliation anymore, not in the way I had when he slapped me. That feeling was changing into something colder, sharper, more watchful. In that moment, I understood that the most vulnerable person in this house was not me. It was my daughter, a child who had been forced to learn how to read adults' faces, overhear half-spoken conversations, and memorize every sign so she would know when she needed to step in and protect her mother. Julian stared at her, his face going whiter by the second. He was no longer looking at a stubborn child. It was the look of a man who had just realized that standing in front of him was the key that could unlock everything he had worked so hard to bury. I stood still for a few seconds after my daughter spoke, but inside, something had just completely collapsed. Before this, every time I stepped into the Powell house, I always reminded myself to look at each of them with goodwill, to believe their coldness was only a difference in personality, that when they stayed silent in the face of Julian's behavior, it was simply because they didn't want to interfere in a married couple's private matters. But tonight, with my cheek still burning from the slap that had just landed, I suddenly saw something far crueler. They were not bystanders. They were part of what had raised him. I looked at Henry Ward first. He was still sitting there, both hands resting on his knees, his eyes lowered to the floor, as if, by not looking up, he would not have to bear responsibility for what had just happened. His silence was no longer gentle. It was a surrender that had lasted too long, so long it had become a habit, so long that a man could watch his son-in-law strike his wife right in front of him and still choose to remain seated. I used to think Henry was a kind man, just a weak one. It was only then that I understood. Weakness, repeated often enough, becomes complicity. Haley Perry was different. She drew in a breath, pressed her lips together, then spoke in a low but firm voice, as if she were tidying up a glass that had just shattered on the table. Julian just got too heated. Everyone loses control sometimes. Those words sent a chill from the back of my neck down my spine. She did not ask if I was hurt. She did not turn to blame her son. The very first thing she did was drape a clean cloth over something filthy, give it a softer name, a name easier to swallow. Every family has its heated moments. Think of your child. Don't make this into a bigger issue. The house is peaceful right now. Don't make everything more complicated. I had heard words like that for years, from different people, in different situations. Now they gathered into a single rope, tightening around my chest. James Taylor still wore that infuriatingly blank expression. He took a sip of water, glanced at Julian, then looked at me as if weighing which side would be more inconvenient. People like James exhausted me the most, because they like to wear neutrality like a virtue. But neutrality in the face of wrongdoing has never been harmless. It is only a more polite way of siding with the stronger person. Wyatt Collins was the opposite. He was visibly uneasy, his fingers tapping the arm of his chair and then stopping, his gaze shifting constantly between me, my daughter, and Julian. Wyatt looked like someone standing in front of a door, knowing he had to walk through it, but still afraid of losing his place in this house. Suddenly, I remembered so many things I had always tried to push aside. The times Julian mocked me in front of everyone. "Leah's very sensitive, don't mind her," he would say, and the whole table would give a thin laugh, as if it were some harmless joke. The times he squeezed my wrist hard in the kitchen when no one was looking, then stepped back outside wearing such a normal expression that even I started to wonder whether I had exaggerated it. The times he criticized me in public, corrected my tone, cut me off, turned me into the person who always had to apologize to keep the atmosphere pleasant for everyone else. I used to comfort myself by saying Julian was just hot-tempered, just clumsy in the way he loved. But tonight was the first time he had dared to slap me in front of his whole family, and the truth was painfully clear. He only dared do it because he knew no one would stop him. What hurt me most was not the slap. It was the moment I realized that some of the people in this room were not surprised at all. Haley was not shocked. Henry was not panicked. James did not leap to his feet. Even Wyatt's discomfort carried the look of someone who had seen warning signs before. They knew. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every single time, but they knew enough to understand that I had not been safe in this marriage. And they still let me come back here, holiday after holiday. Still told me to endure it, told me to think of my child, told me to keep the peace, as if their comfort mattered more than my dignity. I reached my hand toward my daughter. Come on, sweetheart. My voice was rough, but for the first time in years, I was not speaking to ask anyone's permission. I only wanted to get my daughter out of that house immediately, before Julian had the chance to twist this into my fault yet again. She stepped close beside me. I had barely turned when I heard a chair scrape sharply behind me. Emily Morris stepped forward and blocked the way. Her face was pale, her hands clasped tightly together as if she were trying to keep them from shaking. Emily looked at me, then darted a glance toward Julian. Her eyes did not look pitiful, and they definitely did not look curious. They were the eyes of someone who had carried a secret for so long that it was starting to suffocate her. "Leah," she said very quietly, so quietly I had to lean in to hear her clearly. "If you leave now, you're still leaving exactly the way Julian wants you to." I froze. Emily swallowed hard, her eyes reddening. "You still don't know the worst thing he's done behind your back." Emily moved closer to me, while Haley was still trying to drag the dinner back into its usual veneer of fake politeness. She brushed my elbow lightly, her fingers ice cold, her eyes not meeting mine directly as she tipped her head toward the narrow hallway beside the kitchen. I hesitated for a beat, then followed her. Even then, I could still feel Julian's stare pinned between my shoulder blades, sharp and cold, like a blade pressed to the back of my neck. Haley was watching too, her lips pressed tight, and the look on her face was no longer irritation, it was fear. Emily stood tucked into the corner, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She drew in a few breaths like someone about to dive underwater. I had not even spoken yet when she started talking, barely above a whisper, but every word hit me full in the face. "Leah, you have to listen to me this time. This didn't just start tonight." I looked at her without blinking. "Then when did it start, Emily? The first time he humiliated me in front of everyone, or the moment your whole family learned to bow their heads and get through it?" She closed her eyes, as if the question had torn open a wound she had hidden for too long. Then Emily spoke, fast and trembling, telling me Julian had never been just a hot-tempered man. He held people with very specific things: money, debt, records, and secrets. When James was close to losing his job, Julian gave him money. When Wyatt got tangled in financial trouble, Julian stepped in and fixed it. When Haley needed to keep the house from being taken by the bank, Julian was the one who made it happen. Every time he came through at exactly the right moment, he tightened another rope around someone's neck. "He never helps anyone for free," Emily said, her voice breaking. "He buys their silence." My stomach twisted as I listened. For years, I had wondered why every time Julian crossed the line, everyone looked away, changed the subject, or told me I should just let it go to keep peace in the house. Now I understood it was not simple indifference. It was a structure built a long time ago, one where gratitude had been twisted into obedience, where shame became the cord tying each person to the same hand. I asked Emily, "And where do you stand in that structure?" She looked up. Her eyes were red, but this time she did not hide. "I stayed silent to save myself. I knew he was controlling you. I knew he made you doubt your own memory, made you feel too sensitive, too difficult, too quick to rebel. One time, I even heard him tell Haley that if they let you stay ashamed long enough, you would shrink yourself." That last sentence sent ice through me. I turned my face away and bit my lip so hard I tasted blood. I had once believed the feeling of getting smaller and smaller inside my own home was because I was weak. Now I knew there had been hands shaping me into that all along, one person driving it, another looking away, one going along out of fear, another bowing for what they stood to gain. "You knew, and you still let it happen?" I asked, my voice rough and hoarse. Emily burst into tears, but not the kind meant to ask for forgiveness. It was more like the collapse of someone exhausted from pretending to be a bystander. "Yes, I let it happen. I thought if I stayed quiet, he wouldn't turn on me. I thought silence was how you survived. But tonight, when he slapped you in front of your daughter, I finally understood we weren't surviving. We were the people who helped him do it." Fast footsteps sounded behind us. Haley appeared at the mouth of the hallway, her face flushed dark red. "Emily, enough. Be quiet right now." Emily turned, and for the first time, I saw that she was not backing down. "No, you're the one who needs to stop. You called it protecting the family, but really, you were just protecting the image of an abuser." Haley froze for a second, then ground out each word. Do you have any idea how much Julian has carried this family? He hasn't carried anyone, Emily cut in, her voice so sharp it was almost chilling. He's kept everyone under his feet. I stood between them and felt so suffocated I thought I might be sick. Not because of the argument itself, but because I had just understood something worse. In this house, truth was not something anyone had been waiting for. It was the thing everyone was terrified of being dragged into the light, because once it was visible, each of them would have to look straight at their own cowardice. At that moment, I turned toward the dining room and caught sight of my daughter standing at the edge of the doorway. She did not run to me. She did not interrupt. She just looked at Julian with an expression that brought back what she had said earlier, the words that had drained the color from his face in a single instant. A thought flashed through me so sharply it made my scalp prickle. She had not spoken on impulse. She had known something already. Maybe a phone call, a recording, a text message, something she had overheard or seen by accident, because the adults assumed a child would not understand. I had not even taken a step toward her when Julian's phone rang. The sound cut through the choking silence of the house. Julian looked down at the screen, and in that exact moment, all the blood drained from his face. I did not see all of it clearly. I only caught the caller's name and a message lighting up on the lock screen, but it was enough for me to know that something had just surfaced in plain view before he had time to hide it. After hearing Emily say out loud all the things she had swallowed for years, I could no longer see my marriage as a string of unfortunate incidents. All the scattered fragments suddenly locked together so perfectly that it made me nauseous. The times I asked about the money in our savings account, and Julian looked at me with weary disappointment, as if I were some petty, grasping woman. The moments when I clearly remembered something he had said, but the second he lowered his voice, gave that faint mocking smile, and told me I was adding things that never happened, I started doubting my own mind. One time, I stood in the kitchen with the utility bill in my hand, knowing perfectly well the amount transferred out was wrong, and yet after 10 minutes of listening to him explain it away, I was the one apologizing for blowing everything out of proportion. Looking back now, I understand it was never an argument. It was the way he bent my perception little by little, steadily, patiently, until I could no longer trust my own feelings. I remembered the way he narrowed my world without ever having to directly forbid anything. He never told me I couldn't see Emily, but every time I brought her up, he somehow chose that exact moment to say something like, "You always listen to outsiders more than your own husband." He never stopped me from calling Eva, but whenever her name lit up on my phone, he would put on that tired expression and ask if I really had to tell everyone our private business. Little by little, I became ashamed of even needing someone to listen to me. I texted less, I went out less, I told the truth less. Old friends checked in, and I said I was busy. My mother called, and I told her everything was fine. Julian never locked me inside the house. He did something far more frightening. He made me withdraw on my own. He made me feel that speaking up was troublesome, excessive, and ungrateful toward a husband who, to the outside world, was always polite and considerate. While I stood there frozen inside those thoughts, a man's voice behind me made me turn around. James was standing near the kitchen doorway, still holding a glass of water, but his eyes were restless. Maybe he assumed I was too shaken to connect the details anymore, because what slipped out of his mouth was careless in a way he could not take back. He glanced toward the living room, then said quietly, "Julian told us ahead of time that if there ever came a day when you got angry or started saying things, the family should stay calm because you were prone to getting overly stressed after giving birth." I looked straight at James. "What did you just say?" He froze, his face draining as if he had missed a step in the dark. "I just thought you already knew." Already knew. Those two words sent a shiver down my spine. Julian had not only wanted to win every argument, he had prepared a story about me in advance, so that if the day ever came when I opened my mouth, people would not hear what I was saying. They would only look at me and see someone unstable, sensitive, easily agitated, imaginative. He had already sealed off my escape route, then stood there waiting for me to slam myself against that invisible door. For the first time in a very long while, the fear inside me did not grow larger. It shrank, because once a pattern reveals itself, it is no longer darkness. I walked straight into the living room. Julian was standing by the fireplace. his face already restored to that familiar calm, as if all of this were just a small misunderstanding that could be swept away with a few carefully chosen words. When he saw me coming toward him, one corner of his mouth lifted, his voice low and cold. "You should stop before you make everything worse." I stopped in front of him, hearing my own heartbeat clearly but not backing down. "You're the one who needs to stop. Stop lying in front of my daughter." His eyes darkened. "Leah, you don't know what you're talking about." "I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know about the money. I know you told your family things about me ahead of time. I know you wanted everyone to believe I was unstable, so that later, if I ever spoke up, no one would have to believe me." Julian's jaw tightened. He stepped half a pace closer, close enough for anyone else to mistake it for intimacy, but I could hear the threat pinned inside every word. "Be careful what you accuse me of. You'll regret it." Normally, that would have made me falter. Not tonight. Suddenly, I remembered what my daughter had said earlier, her voice trembling but certain. Daddy was trying to grab the tablet. At the time, I had been too stunned to understand. Now every thread in my mind pulled tight around the same point. Not my phone. Not Emily's testimony. The tablet my daughter used for school and drawing. The one Julian rarely touched unless there was something in it he needed to erase. I spun toward the hallway leading to the stairs. Julian turned too, just for a split second, and that split second was enough. I ran before he could block my way. Behind me, a chair scraped violently across the floor with a sharp crack. Someone was running. Not just one person, but at least two. Just as I reached the top of the stairs and knew which room I needed to get into, the door in front of me was yanked open from the inside, and a figure rushed toward the drawer beside the desk, as if trying to wipe away whatever I was about to see. I had made it halfway down the hall when I stopped. My body was still shaking, my cheeks still burned, but something inside me had shifted. If I walked out of this house in silence, Julian would get to tell the story first again, and then his family would sit around together, stitching in a few extra details, turning me into the unstable wife, turning the slap into the pitiful reflex of a husband who had been pushed too far. I turned back. I took my daughter's hand and led her straight into the dining room. The scrape of chairs stopped short. No one said a word. Julian was standing near the head of the table, one hand braced against the wood, his face caught somewhere between irritation and caution. I looked him straight in the eye and said his full name, loud enough that no one could pretend they hadn't heard me clearly. "Julian Powell, tonight you do not get to call this a family misunderstanding anymore." The room grew heavy, as if someone had dumped a bucket of ice water into the middle of the dinner party. My daughter stood tight beside me, her small hand gripping mine. She wasn't crying. She wasn't hiding behind me. The steady silence she held exposed the adult's cowardice more clearly than any accusation I could have made. Julian gave a short, bitter laugh. "Leah, that's enough. Don't drag her into this." I cut him off. "You made her a witness the moment you raised your hand in front of her." Julian started to step forward, but Emily spoke first. Her voice shook, but she wasn't backing down anymore. She told them about years ago, when she had seen Julian twist things to blame other people, how he would deliberately light the fuse and then stand back and play the one who was suffering. Eva jumped in too, talking about the times she had seen me panicked because money had vanished from the account, while Julian calmly told everyone I was reckless with spending, mentally unstable, forgetful one minute, and confused the next. Haley sat frozen, one hand resting on the edge of the table. She opened her mouth several times, but no words came out. On her face, I no longer saw the annoyance of a mother embarrassed by her daughter-in-law. It was the torment of someone finally being forced to look at what she had avoided for far too long. Henry cleared his throat and told everyone to calm down, but James looked at him and said something that silenced the entire room. "How exactly are we supposed to stay calm?" he said. "When everyone knows Julian always makes sure he tells the story first, so the rest of us keep our mouths shut." Julian whipped around to face him. "Shut up." "No," James said. "I've been quiet long enough." I took out my phone. My hand was no longer shaking the way it had been before. I opened the string of screenshots Emily had just sent me, then set the phone on the table and turned it toward everyone. Message after message appeared. Texts Julian had sent Emily months earlier, telling her that if I asked about the money from the family fund, she should just say I was forgetful. A message he had written to Eva, saying I had been unstable lately, and that he might need someone to testify later if I ever made things up. Then there was a voice recording less than a minute long, Julian's voice so clear it made my skin crawl, telling someone on the other end that he needed to move some of the money into another account first, in case I made a scene and demanded my share. I looked straight at him. You didn't just humiliate me, you planned your exit. You assigned every one of us a role before any of this even happened. Julian's face changed color. He lunged for the phone, but Wyatt was faster, catching his wrist and holding it in place. It was the first time Wyatt had fully taken my side. Don't touch it, he said, his voice low but firm. Layer after layer of truth broke open, and with each one, someone else was forced to admit what they knew. Eva confessed she had suspected something before, but had been too afraid to speak because Julian always made everything sound reasonable. James said he had once seen Julian remove the bank documents from the shared drawer and brush them off as men's business. Even Haley, after a silence so long it hurt, whispered that she had known her son was controlling, but she had kept telling herself he would soften after he became a father. Julian laughed again, but this time there was no confidence in it, only the bitterness of someone cornered. Well, isn't this nice? The whole family suddenly wants to play Monopoly. He pointed straight at me. And you, Leah, what do you think those messages prove, other than that you snoop through other people's phones and make things up? I stepped forward. They prove you knew exactly what you were doing. No, he said through clenched teeth. They prove you're trying to destroy me because you can't stand anyone seeing who you really are. I thought he had run out of moves, but Julian had one more left. He pulled open the cabinet drawer near the dining table and took out a brown file folder I had never seen before. He held it up in front of everyone, his eyes locked on me with that familiar triumphant look, the one he wore whenever he thought he had found the exact place to squeeze. You want the truth? He said slowly. Then let's tell this one too. If you take one more step, I'll submit every page in this file to prove you're not stable enough to keep your child. The whole room went silent. The blood in my body seemed to turn to ice when I saw my name on the front page, and I understood at once. Julian had just pulled out the one thing I feared most to force me to back down. Julian laughed first, the kind of laugh I had feared for years, cold and brief, as if this were all just some clumsy little performance I had staged. He looked around the dinner table, glanced at Henry Ward, then at James Taylor, as if trying to pull each of them back into their familiar place, the place behind him. His voice dropped, even and sharp, and the calmer it sounded, the more chilling it became. Leah is provoking all of this. She knows how to push people to their limit, and then play the victim. If she wants to take our daughter tonight, I'll be speaking to my lawyer first thing tomorrow morning. I will not leave my daughter with an unstable woman. Before, just hearing the word lawyer would have wiped my mind clean. I would have panicked, started explaining, crying, searching every face around the table, begging for just one person to believe me. But in that moment, I looked down at my daughter's small hand, gripping mine so tightly. She wasn't shaking, and I realized I wasn't shaking anymore either. I finally understood that the last thing Julian was still clinging to was not the truth. What had fed him all these years was my fear, my habit of rushing to defend myself in the hope of being treated fairly. But fairness had never existed in this house. There had only ever been silence wrapped in the word family. I looked him straight in the eye. Go ahead and call your lawyer. Say whatever you want. But tonight is the last time I let my pain be turned into something people bargain over. The room went still. Julian blinked, fast, as if he had not expected me to answer him in such a calm voice. I kept going, not raising my voice, not rushing. I'm not asking anyone to believe me anymore. I'm stating exactly what happened. You slapped me in front of your entire family. You controlled the money, twisted my words, and made me question my own memory. And from this moment on, everything involving our daughter and me will be handled outside this house with records, with statements, with whatever can be verified, not with whatever story you decide to tell. Julian took a step forward. You're destroying this family. I'm not destroying anything, I said. I'm just done covering it up. That changed his face completely. For the first time that night, I saw Julian lose control of the room's rhythm. Emily Morris, who had sat silently through the entire dinner, her eyes red-rimmed, finally looked up. Haley Perry turned to look at her son, and her face no longer held the same blind defense it had before. Maybe for the first time, she understood that every time she told me to endure it for the sake of peace in the home, she had not been saving the family. She had only been helping her son sink deeper. Then Henry Ward spoke. His voice was low and heavy enough to make everyone turn. Julian enough. Just 2 words, but Julian's whole body went rigid. I had the feeling that even he could not believe his father had actually spoken. Henry did not look at me, he looked straight at his son. I stayed silent for too long, and I was wrong. Tonight, I saw clearly what you did. James Taylor, who always avoided getting involved in family matters, tightened his jaw, and then spoke slowly, as if forcing himself to admit something he did not want to admit. I heard that slap. No one gets to call that a misunderstanding. My daughter's hand gently tugged me back a little. She moved completely away from where Julian was standing, then wrapped both arms around mine. It was such a small gesture, so simple and decisive, but it made Julian's face go white. He did not lose power because of my words. He lost it the moment his daughter chose, on her own, which side she was standing on. I lowered my eyes to her, then looked up again. She's coming with me. I turned and drew her with me. Exhaustion crashed over my body like a tide, but strangely, I was no longer panicking. Something inside me had drawn a clear line, and I knew no one would ever cross it again. We had only taken a few steps when a woman's voice sounded behind us, trembling but clear. "Leah, wait." I stopped. The whole room seemed to stop with me. When I turned back, I saw Haley Perry rising from her chair. Her face had gone pale, and both hands were gripping the edge of the table, as if it were taking everything she had just to remain standing. But in her eyes, for the first time, there was no more avoidance. And in that instant, I knew she was about to say something that could lock the truth of that night into place once and for all. The moment Julian finished speaking, Henry Ward slowly rose to his feet. I was so used to seeing him stay silent that I had almost started to believe it was simply his nature. But tonight, that silence finally broke. He didn't look at me first. He looked at Julian for a long time, as if he were looking at something he had enabled for so long that there was no longer any way to deny it. His voice was rough, not loud, but clear enough for everyone at the table to hear. "That's enough. Don't say another word." Julian froze. I saw the change in his face clearly, quick, slight, but real. It was the moment he realized something had just slipped out of his hands. Henry drew in a heavy breath and went on, each word sounding as though it had been dragged out of a place he had kept locked for years. He said he had once seen Julian gripping my wrist in the kitchen hard enough to leave bruises, then dismissed it as a private matter between husband and wife. He said he had heard Julian threaten to take custody every time I tried to leave. He said that tonight, before everyone sat down at the table, he had heard Julian tell me I should know my place if I didn't want to embarrass the whole family. The room went still, as if all the air had been pulled out of it. Julian whipped around to face his father. "What are you doing?" Henry closed his eyes for a second, then opened them and looked straight at him. "I'm telling the truth, the thing I should have done a long time ago." Emily Morris broke down crying right after that. She lifted a hand to cover her mouth, but she couldn't hide the panic and shame rising across her face. She said she knew Julian had twisted the story in front of the family again and again, turning every time I reacted into proof of what he called my instability. She said there had been one night when I called her at midnight, my voice shaking so badly I could barely get the words out, and the next morning she had still forced herself to believe Julian when he said I was too sensitive. Eva Bennett sat there in stunned silence for a few seconds, then nodded and confirmed that she had seen messages Julian sent me, cold lines full of threat, always written cleverly enough that outsiders would only find them vague. That was it. It was no longer my word against Julian's. It was no longer the story of a supposedly fragile wife trying to explain her pain to people who only wanted dinner to stay peaceful. The truth had stepped out into the middle of the room and planted itself in front of everyone, and for the first time, I was no longer straining to hold it up by myself. Julian looked at each person around the table, as if waiting for someone to save him, but no one moved for him anymore. James Taylor avoided his eyes. Haley Perry sank back into her chair, her face drained of all color. And my daughter was still standing beside me, her small hand gripping mine so tightly it hurt. I looked down at her, and something in my chest ached and warmed all at once until I could barely breathe around it. A child should only have memories of dinners filled with laughter, and yet she had been forced to learn how to tell the difference between a safe room and one about to explode. I didn't say anything else to Julian. By then, I understood that there are words that no longer need to be said. I just turned to Emily. She sprang to her feet as if she had already been waiting. "I'll walk you and your daughter to the car," she said, her voice still shaking but no longer retreating. Eva picked up my bag from where it sat near the door. James stepped forward and quietly opened the front gate. It didn't erase all the times they had stayed silent, but at least tonight, they had begun to do one thing right. I walked out of that house feeling so drained that it seemed a light touch could have made me collapse. But underneath that exhaustion was a clear, steady feeling I had not known in years. My daughter hadn't just saved me from one night of humiliation. She had cut the last thread that had kept me there through the habit of making excuses. I could no longer tell myself that Julian was only angry in the moment, that things would get better, that enduring a little more for my child would be fine. She had looked straight at the fear I had avoided for far too long and then pulled me out of it. When we reached the car, Emily opened the door so my daughter could get in first. She looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed. "If you need me to testify, I will. I won't stay silent this time." I nodded. "Thank you." Just 2 words, but I said them with the clarity of someone who finally knew where she was going. I didn't feel like I had won. I only felt that I was choosing to protect my daughter's future, choosing to hold on to the dignity that had been worn away over so many years, choosing to begin again from a place that was very small, very difficult, but real. As the car pulled away, I looked through the window. Julian was still standing on the front steps, motionless inside the house that had once been his stage. For the first time, he could not control anyone's gaze, could not steer the story, could not pull a single person to his side. The pale face under the porch light was no longer mine. My daughter leaned her head against my shoulder, her hand still clinging to mine as if she were afraid I might disappear. I squeezed her hand gently, kissed the top of her hair, and closed my eyes for a second. That night, I didn't take much with me out of that house. Just one bag, a few documents, and my daughter's hand in mine. But that was enough to begin again. And for the first time in years, I knew one thing with perfect clarity: I was never going back.